Italians. I'm in there.
I know, I'm part Italian here. But the inspector says, no, you didn't ask permission first, and so we won't, they won't give him a variance or anything like that. So the son tried to go through and apply for a permit. Nope, you didn't ask permission the first time. Just that bureaucratic hard-headedness. I'm going to turn this camera so that Mo can be seen here. In case you had a look of disgust on your face there, Mo. You got a hold of her.
Yes, I did.
You are awesome.
She's at a restaurant, so I think she'll be okay. But she still said about 5-10 minutes.
Okay, we'll keep it short. Awesome. We got Jeanette.
Where are they at again?
Portland. Welcome back to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. Mo is here producing for me today and taking your calls at 801-254-1640. I have Jeanette Finicum on the telephone with me. Jeanette, thanks for taking part of your lunch break from court there in Portland to check in with us and keep our listeners informed. How are things going today?
Thank you, Bryan, for having me on. Things are going pretty well. We have been listening to one of the men who took shots and killed my husband today.
So was this Officer 1?
Yes, he's referred to as Officer 1.
Yeah, we had a caller last hour in the Joe Carey show who said, isn't it remarkable that the people directly involved in killing Lavoy Finicum, they don't have names. The government doesn't want anybody to know who they are. And I don't know, I'm painting with kind of a broad brush here, but if something you've done requires secrecy, you really should question whether it should have been done in the first place.
Right, well, they're continuing to have the narrative in court that they were threatened and continue to be threatened, and I know of no one who has done so. I know certainly not our family and nobody associated with us, but that is their narrative in court, that they fear for their lives even now, and so their identity is kept secret, their pictures are not allowed to be drawn, the artist is not allowed to do a cartoon of them, nothing. The judge is able to keep them protected. I understand that there are officers that may have their life at risk, but I don't think that there is any fear of that. I think they're creating the fear so that they can justify their actions.
Well, it sounds like what they're doing is they're playing the card of, look, we're the victims here.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
That's infuriating, but at least this is taking place in a courtroom where there's a degree of accountability being sought. Has anything new come forward? It seems like what came out in the last week wasn't very complimentary to that government narrative that, hey, this was all on Finicum and the Bundys, and they were the ones who made us do this. It sounded like there's a lot of dodging going on the part of the government officials who were involved.
We have two forms of our government fighting each other in this courtroom, and they're both pointing fingers at each other. That's going to continue throughout the whole 4 weeks of this case. I see that. Neither one wants to take responsibility for what happened that day.
Wow.
So they're both painting each other as the bad guy. It's very interesting to sit there and hear the inconsistencies, and there's quite a few of them. It's an interesting case. It's been very difficult today to sit there and listen to this man. It was difficult yesterday listening to Officer 2, the other man who shot and killed his boy. But our family is resolved in holding these gentlemen accountable for what they did, so we need to be there to hear the evidence.
I am sorry that that's something that you have to sit through at this time, and I can't imagine how difficult that must be to be there in the same room. I hope that for the sake of those men who were on the stand testifying, I hope it's somewhat difficult for them too. I hope that as they see you sitting there in that courtroom, they start to grasp that the magical costume and badge and authority with which they were cloaked does not exempt them from the universal rules of right and wrong.
I don't know that is happening at all. I don't know if this officer or this man has a conscience to that effect. I know that he's been involved in many other shootings and killings, and so that needs to be explored too, and I look forward to that in our case.
I understand too. You have a lot of friends and a lot of close supporters who have shown up to support you. Is that correct?
Yes, there's been wonderful people come out today to be there to support me and to fill the courtroom. We're all, there to hear and to testify for ourselves of the truth. And I know that they're here to support our family overall. I know there's hundreds of people that are just listening and sitting at home waiting for the updates to know what's going on. And I know that their love and support and prayers have come my way, and I thank all of you for it. Thank you so much.
Well, Jeanette, I'm not going to take any more of your lunch. I appreciate you checking in with us. I'm sorry this is such a difficult experience, but like many others, I admire your bravery. I admire the bravery of Lavoie. I just this morning, a friend contacted me and said, as he has watched and as he's listened and followed the coverage of this trial, he says it's very humbling to him because he met Lavoie once, but he says, I cannot believe the impact that man had on my life. And he says, and the more I learn about the circumstances of his death, the more shocked I am that I know someone who was so effective in enunciating the message of liberty that he was assassinated.
Right, and that's the one thing that is not being heard in this courtroom, which is frustrating to sit there and listen to them refer to him as a militia leader, as a terrorist, as someone who they felt very threatened by. And so I am looking forward to our opportunity in the wrongful death to be able to introduce to our jury who Lavoie Finicum really was and what he was standing for, and all of the good things about my husband, and none of which are being heard today or will be heard through this process.
All right. Well, God bless you and your family, and thank you so much for taking the time to check in with us. I hope that we can do this on a semi-regular basis because coming from you, this carries so much weight.
Thank you, Bryan. I thank you for continuing to help us to tell the story. I appreciate you and all you listeners.
All right. Take care, Jeanette, and thank you so much. That was Jeanette Finicum from Portland, Oregon. Can you imagine how difficult it would be? I mean, look, on the one hand, families who go to court when someone has been accused of murdering a loved one, and they sit through the trial, and here's the accused murderer, and sometimes the murderer is very penitent, or the accused murderer. Sometimes they're very defiant and unrepentant. But in this case, you're dealing with a class of individuals who in every way consider themselves above the law, above accountability. They make a big deal out of, these sovereign citizens, they say the laws don't apply to them. Well, under that standard, it seems to me the sovereign citizens, the ones who the law doesn't apply to, were the ones who were standing there in uniforms or pointing guns at people and threatening people, not the protesters.
Man, I can't even comprehend what she's going through with these trials. Will she, when the defense, they get a chance to present their arguments and, kind of go into him, will she get a chance to testify as well?
Well, now keep in mind, this is the trial of the FBI agent.
Oh, right.
So in this case, I'm actually rooting for the government prosecutors to make their case and to hold this man accountable for 2 shots that were fired that everybody claims we don't know where it came from, but they were not beanbag rounds, they weren't paintballs, they weren't rubber bullets, they were lethal rounds that were fired without justification.
So she won't get the opportunity to testify?
Not in this trial. Not in this trial. But the wrongful death suit that is coming up and will be moving forward, that's where she will have the chance, and where her team will be able to give a more clear picture on the court record of who was Lavoie Finicum and what was he like. We hear the term fake news, and for some people, for newspaper reporters especially, I find you can't talk about fake news. That's the worst thing ever. And I found this, there was a quote somebody had put up today. I think it was my friend Doug had posted this, where there was an individual talking to President Trump, and saying, the phrase fake news is untrue and harmful. And he said, I am far more concerned about the president labeling journalists the enemy of the people. And he says, I warned that this inflammatory language is contributing to a rise in threats against journalists, and it will lead to violence. And the person writing this says, what about the media labeling Lavoie Finicum a domestic sovereign citizen terrorist? That was fake news. That was an absolute distortion of the truth. And it caused the authorities to overreact and to be very violent where there was no need for violence, and it resulted in Lavoie Finicum's death. So if they want to talk about the danger of, you talk about fake news, you talk about how journalists are enemies to the people, well, but in this case they were enemies to a man who had harmed no one, who had threatened no one. And the way that they portrayed the story, the way that they created this monster, this caricature of Lavoie Finicum, that is what prompted the police who were at that roadblock to act the way they did, to set up an ambush the way that they did, and to shoot him at the very slightest justification as soon as they got a technicality to do so. The journalists and the authorities who spewed that propaganda are the ones who got Lavoie killed. And they were among the ones who applauded his death. They pointed out the day that Lavoie's funeral took place in Kanab, they threw a big party in Burns, Oregon. I'll tell you, I can't understand the hatred that I see on the part of some people towards Lavoie Finicum, towards the Bundys. And I say this from the standpoint of, these are people who've never been directly harmed or in any way affected by them. It's just like a bandwagon of hatred came by and they thought, hey, I'm going to jump on. But if you want to know where fake news applies, yeah, the way that it was described, the way Lavoie was described, that was fake news. And it is deadly. And it in part resulted in his death. We'll be back after this.
When the weather's hot outside.
I really have to watch myself when I start talking about that, because I don't know if you can see, my face is red. I'm pissed. It just makes me so mad.
The journalists were probably, I mean, they're acting on they got their information from the authorities, right?
In part.
So I mean,
But they also,
I'm not absolving them of blame.
but they also had their own agenda.
No, and
their
they
agenda is,
also-
we've got to report this in the least favorable way to those rowdies who are challenging our friends, the authorities who
The
give us
journalists,
access and who
that's-
give us privilege.
No, that's what I'm saying. The journalists are like,
Yeah.
we got our information from the authorities because they're the authorities. Should they do a little bit of their own investigating? Probably.
Yeah.
That's what the job is.
And the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, has been working with the FBI, feeding them this garbage. Oh yeah, they're dangerous militia groups. You want to talk about a dangerous group of propagandists? Holy cow.
Southern, oh yeah, we talked about
SPLC.
I want to get that, but I'm sure it's Ray just saying, hey, can I comment now?
See if it's him. If I probably won't take
I was gonna
won't
say,
take his call,
I'm
but
pretty sure it's him.
I may not get to the wheelchair ramp story, but I kind of want to. Garrett, I'd like to know more about your story. I may have to contact you via social media and see if we can talk.
He was wondering if he could talk to you off air on the segment. Or in the
I
segment.
won't have time till I'm actually done. So
Well, okay. No.
tell him thanks, but
Okay. No, again, I gotta make sure you want to say no.
thank you. I appreciate you asking. It's too easy to get drawn into a protracted conversation when I have to be back on the air in like a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and I've done that before. I've learned from that. What's on the air gets priority over what isn't on the air. All right.
We help plan and review your business model, draft the necessary paperwork, and work with you when legal challenges and opportunities arise as part of your business.
Time goes so quickly, and it's probably just because I'm running my mouth, but I sit down and I'm like, okay, I've got 2 hours of radio to do today. Man, I hope I can fill that time. And then it starts, and I swear it's done just that quick. And we're back. Case in point. Welcome back to Loving Liberty. I'm Bryan Hyde. Lines are open at 801-254-1640. I was explaining to Mo when I finished that last segment, I was like, look at my face. It's red. I'm angry. And I, well, you just must have a hot temper and no self-control, Mr. Hyde. Ah, there it is. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They couldn't have named you better. No, there's a lot that doesn't bother me. There's a lot that I can just let slide right off my back. Political intrigue, yeah, whatever. Call me whatever you want to call me. I've been called names. I've been barked at by bigger dogs than you. But when I think about the injustice that has been done, that just, it irritates me. And when I think of the suffering, the real suffering that people are going through, and it's not so much, life is full of suffering, and we all run into hard things. A good friend of ours drowned last week at Lake Powell, and that just left this huge gaping hole in humanity by his absence. Tragedies all around us. The part that makes me the angriest is that there are people who actually enjoy it. There's people who thrive on it. They get this demonic sense of glee out of tormenting other people. And I've never been to hell. I don't want to go there. But, when I try to picture in my mind what could make hell such an awful place, I think that's what it is. It's that idea that you are surrounded by others who thrive on suffering and who do nothing to help one another. Their purpose is to make everybody as miserable as they are. And it's disturbing, but it's especially disturbing when you see a good man cut down unjustly and his family suffering unjustly, and the thought that people would actually throw a party the day of his funeral just because, hey, look at us.
I'm glad we don't really know anyone like that. That, as you say, enjoys or is gleeful about other people's misfortune or sorrows. But I even being around you and hearing about the Bundys and the Hammonds and Jeanette and Lavoie, I'm still very ill-informed of all this, what happened, how it went down. So just out of curiosity right now, I was like, let me just type in Finicum on Google. Let's see what comes up first, right?
And what happened?
Well, I just know Jeanette and Lavoie, just Finicum, and hit enter, and it has Lavoie's Wikipedia page. And I'm like, this should be interesting. Let's see what comes up. And I didn't memorize it, but right now it starts off saying he was a leader of a militia, constitutional something against something like that. But
he was not a militia leader.
I was reading this and I'm like, let me see how it's been portrayed. And you probably don't even want to see the Wikipedia page, man. So
well, there's a reason college professors freak out when someone writes a paper and uses Wikipedia as a site.
Anybody can edit that. Anyone who's written a paper will know that Wikipedia is kind of it has good information, but that anybody can edit it. That's the problem.
This is one of the reasons why I am so passionate when I speak out about this, because there is such a great amount of disinformation regarding Lavoie, regarding the Bundys. And the part that gets me is, I didn't picture myself, I never pictured myself, this is what I'm going to end up doing someday, talking about these kind of things. But fate, no, I'll say it this way. For whatever purpose, God placed me with a very good vantage point to what happened at Bundy Ranch, and it didn't just start the day of, it started the day that Ryan Bundy and I became friends many years ago. It started with the kind of friendship that we had. It continued through our ability to associate on a nearly weekly basis, and not just in casual, oh hey, yeah, I ran into him at lunch, but I mean sitting down and discussing some of the most important topics of what we value most in the world. And it was always done in the context of there's purpose behind this, that we believed, that God created us, and that He gave us this incredible gift of liberty, and that we have a responsibility, and we're trying to do our part with His help to continue to perpetuate that liberty for those who will follow us. That all started for me some 13 years ago. And at various points along this journey, fate, if you will, or God, has placed me at a vantage point where I've watched some incredible pivot points of history take place. One of them was that April day at Bundy Ranch. And I will unapologetically tell you, I was changed by what I experienced that day. And I wasn't there for the standoff. I was just there at the ranch that morning. But I will make no bones about it. The Bundys are good people. They are God-fearing people, and they are humble people. And I also learned that day that the cause of liberty is something that God is very much a part of. Later on, just a couple of years later, a man named Lavoie Finicum came into my life. Actually, it was about a year later, and introduced himself and gave me a copy of his book and invited me to interview him. And as soon as I learned he had been at Bundy Ranch, because of the profound experience that I had had there, I invited him to come and talk to me, first off the air, because I wanted to hear his experience. And from a spiritual vantage point, his experience was very, very similar. It was clear there was much more going on that day than simply Cliven versus the feds. I watched as Lavoie honed his message of freedom as he took a very brave stand, and I think a very principled stand, and he stopped doing business with the Bureau of Land Management. Now, he wasn't hateful about it. He talked about how he loved his range cons. He talked about how they were very decent to him, but in good conscience, his ethics would not let him continue to play along with something that was actually damaging to freedom. And so he withdrew his consent and was setting an example for other people around him. Shortly after this, the occupation of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge took place. And, you know, in both Bunkerville and Malheur, you're talking about civil disobedience. And I have to confess, there were times in both of those instances I was like, oh, I don't know about this. But I cannot deny that the individuals who were involved are good, humble men, and I truly believe that they were acting under the best inspiration that they had at that time. And the fact that none of them pointed a gun at anyone, the fact that they never threatened anyone, they never harmed anyone, to me gives them an undeniable moral high ground that just cannot be taken away. And for whatever reason, I was there to be friends with them, to give them an opportunity to express their voice. Later on, I was given the opportunity just this last year to go down and to sit in the courtroom and observe the trial of Cliven Bundy and Ryan Bundy and Ammon Bundy and Ryan Payne. And I don't know what exactly my role in all this is. It's not about me. I'm just trying to be a good witness for what I've been able to see. But what I have been able to see is that there are very good, decent people who are trying to make a stand for what is right. And they're up against a system which has rigged the laws and rigged the procedures and rigged public perception in such a way there is no way to make a stand without being labeled as some kind of a madman or malcontent. And because I know these people personally, I know how wrong that narrative is. I understand how distorted it is. And so it troubles me when I see people, you know, rejoice and express satisfaction or even glee that, oh, they're suffering and they're never going to get back that 2 years that they sat in jail. And, you know, if that's something that gives you joy, I'm not going to tell you. You can't have joy for that. But if you think that the time that these individuals spent in jail, if you think their mistreatment and their brutalization at the hands of the government, well, that taught them well, you should go study a little bit about geology. You should learn about the process by which diamonds are made. Intense heat, intense pressure. And I'm here to tell you that the folks who came out on the other side of this are diamonds. They're as good a people as you are ever likely to meet. Now, if you haven't met them in person, I totally understand. You don't have to take my word for it. But I would encourage you to just ask this question: what if? What if the narrative that was pushed by a media, which was very eager, you know, because if it bleeds, it leads. Ooh, you know, intrigue. There could be some violence, and boy, you know, they were really quite disappointed. At least that was the perception. They were disappointed when Bunkerville didn't turn out to be a bloodbath. The fact that the Malheur Refuge occupation ended for the most part peacefully, with one very notable exception, and that being the death of Lavoie Finicum, that kind of disappointed the media as well. And it's been interesting to watch their reaction as time and again, all of those great, powerful institutions and people who have lined up to destroy the Bundys, to destroy those who participated, have ended up falling into the pit that they dug for others. I mean, I'll admit, I think back with a little bit of satisfaction. That last day in court down in Las Vegas, we knew it was going to be a packed courtroom, so I had my press credentials. I was one of the first people sitting on the bench where the reporters sit, and ooh, the looks of contempt as those real reporters filed by me. How dare I be sitting there? But, you know, the federal marshal came over and checked out, you know, do I have the credentials? I sure did. I'll never forget the elevator ride down from the 7th floor in the federal building, or the federal court building in Vegas, the day that the mistrial was declared. I jumped into the elevator with about 7 different journalists. That was the quietest elevator ride I have ever had in my life. I'm sure they would have spoken more freely if I wasn't there, but hey. So, now you know a little bit about where I'm coming from. Have a wonderful day. See you back here tomorrow.
As a small business owner, you make